So yeah, I think we're live. Hello and welcome to our meetup organized by the Bitcoin Munich meetup group. We're doing some kind of seminar every 21st of a month to celebrate Bitcoin's 2100 trillion units of Satoshis and other reasons. And we're always looking for a different topic, and today's topic we thought would be for a change about anarchism. What are the roots of anarchism? And Bitcoin is, of course, related to anarchism in a way. And of course, anarchy does not mean chaos, or is not meant to mean chaos. For people that still have a trouble to understand that, just imagine maybe don't take anything for granted in society, question everything. Maybe you could then imagine a society that's structured in a less hierarchical way. But yes, of course, there's a lot of disagreement how this could be accomplished when Joseph Pierre Proudhon basically invented the term about 200 years ago. He wrote a lot of things, how he imagined things should work in a society, should work differently. He's especially famous for his position that property is theft. Maybe we will get later into this. What exactly did he mean by that? And if the Bitcoin community sees this a bit different, maybe there's some ongoing debate what the term anarchism or libertarianism actually means. I think we will also go into this. But either way, the roots of anarchism and libertarianism is more what we would say today is more left-wing politics. Actually, the term libertarianism, of course, transformed a bit in the 20th century to refer to free market and strong property rights. So there's also kind of an interesting development that was happening. But either way, I think when we look at the topic, we should start at the historic origins. And Ben is also, is especially, I invited Ben today because he's of course very passionate about the subject if you look at his profile. And he already gave a lot of talks about that subject, and I think he's also very keen about bringing some aspects of this topic into the Bitcoin community that maybe get not so much attention as he would like, but maybe not all in the Bitcoin community would agree with the things he say, and maybe we will get some good discussion going later. One thing I would like to propose or put the attention first. Did anybody do the political compass test? Or what do you think about it? If anybody has an opinion on that, that would be funny.
Yeah, I have to do the test.
And what do you think, or what was your result?
I've been placed on the left libertarian side. I guess it's a good side for this talk. Yeah, I think maybe not a lot of questions so that you can be more specific, but I think it's a good test. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you also want to introduce yourself. We have a lot of people in the call.
Yeah, sorry. My name is Lazar. I'm Tunisian, but I'm doing studies in Freiburg, Germany. I'm studying physics. Yeah, I joined this talk more for the political aspect of this political theory more than blockchain or Bitcoin. Yeah, I'm not really like into this specific technical stuff of Bitcoin, but I'm still interested about that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about this kind of meetups. I think that, that there's always some randomness. So nice that you're also joined. Anybody else took the test or has an opinion on this or questions? I mean, personally, I find it interesting what it actually means. This political compass, what the motivation was that just a political spectrum of left and right is not sufficient, right? And in this overview, you have Hitler, for example, at the top, and not at the right, if as it would be in Germany. Maybe in Germany we would have to move that at 90 degrees to the right. But in America, in the US, left and right refers more to the economic aspect of politics. So
yeah, sorry, you told me about my point of view also on the test, and something that I forgot to say.
yeah,
For example, as for example, as a Tunisian, for example, some questions like, are you for or against opening the borders? I think it's also not the same. It's not like a universal truth about any country. I think opening borders in US or Europe is not the same in Africa or something like that. Yeah, that maybe it's one of the limits of the test.
yeah, I also think that there are many aspects. I mean, this compass could have more than just two axes, right? I mean, there's when you put Hitler in this chart, it doesn't say anything about racism. Yeah, it just says that he's authoritarian. He just wants to push his wants to force his opinions on society no matter what, and about economic policy that it's maybe a bit free market, but also definitely strongly regulated. And also for me, the upper left, the lower left and the lower right is not clear. What does it mean if you because you can't force your views upon everyone if you are not authoritarian. So what does it mean if you're bottom left or bottom right? That's is it just how you would guess how a free society would look like, or is it something that you would be fighting for? I don't know, but yeah, if anybody has an opinion on this, then go ahead. Yeah, okay, no one. Then I guess we will head over to Ben, who prepared a little presentation. Ben, you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all weaker than I wanted it to be because I've actually been ill past few days. So I haven't done nearly as much as at work as I wanted to do towards it. But hopefully, you know, there'll be some points in there which people can discuss and we can talk about. Yeah, I'll introduce myself briefly. So I'm Ben Ark. I sort of do encourage. Originally, I started out just trying to encourage people within Bitcoin to play around with small microcontrollers, sending and receiving Bitcoin. But as well as that, as well as the sort of technical stuff which I'm doing, and I do a lot of educational videos as well. If I share my screen, I can kind of like right there. I always miss the button here. I'll share my screen. There we go. Ooh. sorry, one second. It's probably the best way to do it. Okay, here we are. Yeah. So this is the I've got a YouTube playlist of tutorials which I've done while working on Bitcoin projects, like a DIY point of sale, DIY hardware wallet, that sort of thing, all free and open source. And then I've also done some other stuff, like I made a nice piece of software, LM Bits, and this is specifically for like doing Lightning Network things, making it easy for anyone to kind of be a custodian. So you can set up this an LM Bits. It's like, again, free and open source. So you can set up an LM Bits for your friends and family or for your local community, or you could run it for the whole world if you want to, or you could just run it for yourself. And it has kind of like an extension system. So it's a bit like the WordPress of like a Bitcoin Lightning Network wallet type thing. So that's the sort of technical stuff I do. But then on the non-technical side, how do I stop sharing my screen? Oh no, sorry. I don't know what that's doing there. On the non-technical side, I remember Bitcoin quite early on. It always felt very diverse to me. And it kind of felt like there was a kind of rich tapestry of ideas, and there's a lot of kind of anarchist sentiment as well, like sort of lefty anarchist sentiment. And I felt that people tried to corner Bitcoin into having a specific brand for a specific sort of socio-economical viewpoint, which I didn't really agree with. So I sort of thought I'd fly the lefty flag. So my name on Twitter is BTCSocialist, and just to see, you know, if there are other people out there who are like-minded and thought the same way I did. And I've had a really good response. There's been lots of people who, you know, good people who are building interesting things, who are also lefties, and they kind of see they can reconcile their lefty politics with Bitcoin, and they think Bitcoin can, you know, serve and work for what they want it to work for. So I have prepared like a few slides, but not many, and then I'll just go back to just kind of speaking, I think. But I think, you know, your original point there, that originally the question of libertarianism was, how do we provide the most liberty for the most amount of people? And this is why it kind of came from left-wing politics, the idea of liberty, equality, fraternity. You know, the idea that was that, you know, it's very hard to have maximum liberty for everybody without, if you haven't got some kind of equality as well. But then that was, you know, the term was kind of corrupted during the Iron Rand times, and now libertarianism really does kind of refer to a US-centric view of libertarianism, which is more about the self, and if everyone kind of serves themselves, then they'll generate as much liberty for themselves, and then there'll become some sort of equilibrium between everyone, and everyone will have liberty. But it's not a viewpoint I particularly prescribe to or agree with. So and on that Proudhon quote as well, that property is theft, I think Proudhon, I'll throw my viewpoint in here now, but I think Proudhon was referring to ownership over the means of production. So property, you can have private property, you know, your own house or whatever else, but it's when you start to control the means of production, which Proudhon said is theft, and is a kind of a form of violence. So yeah, so the what I'm going for with my talk is, don't box Bitcoin in. It's a dialectic. I'm going to cover a little bit of anarchism, but it's more just kind of, you know, I'm speaking from my own viewpoint, which is as a sort of socialist, lefty, anarchist type. So why I can sort of reconcile my socio-economical viewpoint, my politics, with Bitcoin. And they're also just not branding Bitcoin as being one thing or a specific thing. Yeah, sure, you know, Austrian economists can, some Austrian or students of Austrian economics can reconcile their viewpoints, and they see Bitcoin as hard money, and that's absolutely fine. Other people within Austrian economics don't think that. You know, they don't think it's per se Austrian, but for some people they can reconcile their ideas with it. So then that's absolutely fine. I agree. You know, is it currently hard money? But that doesn't mean that that's all it is, and that's the only camp or group of people which it can be, who can find value in it. And that's kind of what I've been trying to explore. So one of the ways in which I tried to explore this was, we had Dan Held I'm not sure if anyone knows who that is. He did a podcast with Stefan Vera, and it was on the issue of Bitcoin having a branding issue. And then it was quite a controversial podcast. I'm always proud at those moments when Bitcoiners kind of stand up and say, you know, they don't want someone speaking on Bitcoin's behalf. And I think that's kind of the point. Like, I think part of the branding issue is people trying to apply a brand to Bitcoin. So in the thread where we were chatting about this podcast and kind of debating it, I was arguing, well, we should if you want to trying to have maximum impact, then you should be trying to sell Bitcoin, or you should be promoting Bitcoin to areas or groups of people who Bitcoiners don't think to kind of market Bitcoin to. And I said, well, you know, I've heard Yanis Varoufakis speak about Bitcoin in the past, and he always sounded well informed. He was very critical, but he always sounded well informed, and like he kind of knew what he was talking about. He was the finance minister during the Greek economic crisis, and he tried to use some sort of blockchain-centric technology, or he explored using some blockchain-centric technology during those times. So I knew he had an interest in it, but I knew he'd been critical about it. But the last article I read, I think, was from 2017, and that was before all the advancements we'd had with the Lightning Network and with Liquid Network and all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to kind of listen to what he thought about Bitcoin now, you know, and whether he's changed his opinion at all. So I kind of wrote this open letter saying, you know, as a Keynesian, post-Keynesian, do you see value in Bitcoin? And I kind of explained that, you know, you could have like a fiat currency on some sort of pegged second layer, and it could be federated, you know, geographically, and then that could then be connected to Bitcoin, so you have some sort of like base value. And you could do, you know, MMT tricks, like you could stimulate the economy through producing more tokens, or his fiat token or whatever. So I tried to kind of like sell Bitcoin in my letter to him, and then he wrote back, and he was still very critical about Bitcoin. He didn't really take on board, I think, the Lightning Network and second layer stuff kind of went over his head a little bit. And it's technical and it's confusing, and it's a lot for someone like him to have to research to come back with a really informed opinion on that point. But he's still very critical, and he said that he didn't believe that it would do, you know, for a socialist like me, it wouldn't do any fake. There wouldn't be, it wouldn't do any good in the short term. But he did say that at the end of his letter back, he said that having said all this, you know, a monetary commons, which is, you know, I refer to it as well, or something like a blockchain, like something like the blockchain underpinning Bitcoin, will, I have no doubt, be an essential part of a decentralized economy of socialism, or decentralized economy of socialism. So his argument, I suppose, was he didn't think that Bitcoin would be very useful during, you know, the economy in which we're existing in at the moment, so sort of capitalist based economy, but in the future, having some sort of public commons, or having money as a commons, which everybody kind of decides on how it works, that does kind of make sense within kind of a socialist society, or an anarchist society as well. So it was great to kind of get some feed, you know, get him to write back, and then he's got loads of followers on Twitter, and so he kind of, you know, helps get the Bitcoin out there to another group of people. So it was great. That kind of a win. But then shortly after that, there was a tweet by Samson Mao. I think it was in relation to one of Vitalik's tweets saying, you know, Bitcoin is capitalism, Ethereum is socialism, which I didn't think was particularly productive, because it's just going to kind of, you know, he's quite an influential person, and he has a lot of people listen to what he says. So, you know, I just thought it was silly. I thought, you know, you shouldn't, again, don't box Bitcoin in. You know, I'm a socialist, I'm on the left, I produce things in Bitcoin which are useful, and I can see value, sort of, you know, socialist anarchist values in Bitcoin. So, you know, don't define it as being one thing or another. So if I said to Vitalik, is this moronic? He said, yes, you know, there's plenty of capitalist techniques and socialist techniques employed both by BTC and ETH systems, and there's ways that either system can be deployed for either capitalist or socialist ends, which is a point I very much agree with. It's just, you know, it's a technology, it's a protocol, and then use that technology how you want to benefit your political stance or whatever. I'm personally interested in things like cooperatives, and I think that some of the technology we work on in Bitcoin and some of the experiments on consensus are obviously going to inform that field. Yeah, I mean, so why did he say that? Why did Vitalik say that? Well, so within Bitcoin, there's this, people hear the word socialism and they'll think of states, they'll think of state control. In fact, a lot of people in the world will think such a thing because they associate it with, the USSR or Mao. But if you define socialism, what is it? It's just a political economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. So the real question then becomes, well, how is that achieved? And then currently, I personally don't think it could be achieved. I think when it comes to production of things, of food or whatever else, then capitalism's our best bet. But eventually, when we have the right tools, then yeah, we could move into a world full of co-ops and full of producers taking control over the means of production. Which so anarchism, I think, what two good explanations for something like anarchism. Again, I'm talking from the left. I know there's a lot of anarcho-capitalists out there who probably disagree with what I'm saying, but it's democracy from the bottom up. It isn't just chaos, and it isn't just a lack of rules. It's the people, your rule base, and then how people decide how their society is going to work. It comes from the bottom up as opposed to top down. And then I also very much within anarchism as well, like the concept of direct action. So if you want to try and fix a problem, then you directly go and try and fix it straight away. So if you have a well which needs to be built, then rather than go out and fundraise for it, you just go and dig the hole for the well. So direct action is again something which I think Bitcoiners and people using Bitcoin are kind of exploring. So yeah, so this is my political stance and why I call myself Bitcoin socialist, because I'm like, well, okay, okay, it may be hard money and it may encourage strong privacy, property rights, but for me, I'm seeing a system where the decision making on how the system works is coming from the ground up. That the users are the ones who collectively, through adversarial behavior or through doing whatever's best for them, they are actually deciding how the whole system's going to work as a public commons, as something which we're collectively deciding the path for. It's not coming from top down, it's coming from the bottom up. So it's I think when it comes to the sort of socialist left anarchist argument or interest, obviously there's two characters who are very important. There's Mikhail Bakunin, and then there's Karl Marx, and they cross paths during the first international working men's international. Karl Marx, Bakunin agreed with lots of things he said. So he agreed with his analysis of capitalism, how eventually, no matter how great it is, it will destroy itself, just as slavery destroys itself, feudalism destroyed itself, capitalism will destroy itself, and then something will come after capitalism. We're not at the end of history. It's likely that the way in which humans produce things is going to change at some point. But Bakunin was very worried about being more on the kind of anarchist side. He was very worried about Marx's, he kind of lent towards authoritarianism, even if indirectly, and so this idea of a dictatorship of the proletariat, that all the workers will kind of take control. Bakunin said you would just end up trading, one authority for another authority, and it wouldn't improve society at all. It'd probably be much worse. And in that, he kind of predicted, what happened in the USSR. So that was very informed. But Bakunin was he wrote, if you read, what's it? This Bakunin, I can't remember what it's called, on capitalism or something, and he's very critical of capitalism. In some ways, more critical than Marx, because Marx would often talk about all the positive aspects of capitalism's ability to produce lots of things and connect that kind of the world up through trade. So they kind of crossed paths in the first international. It almost became two kind of camps. And more of you had the anarchist side, and then you kind of had the Marx socialist side, and it wasn't so much. It was more Bakunin saying your ideas, however well intended, they will be used in a way which will produce negative outcomes. So one of these, a good example is trade unions. So, there were a lot of people within the socialist movement who said that trade unions actually, encumbered the socialist movement because it was that people were factioned off in their own sort of unions. And then Marx said, no, it doesn't. He's just said that, but he said that when we have socialism, that the trade unions will just kind of wither. They won't be necessary anymore. So then, as Bakunin predicted, then when we had Lenin took control, one of the first things he did is he disbanded the trade unions, locked them all up, and killed a bunch of trade unionists. So he kind of like forced that prediction to come true. And I'm not sure that's not what Karl Marx meant when he said, the trade unions would fizzle away, that they would be forced to fizzle away. But that's kind of what happened. With sorry, one moment. So some of the things which Bakunin agreed with of Karl Marx's were his analysis of capitalism, and then also this concept of his historical materialism, which is that you have slavery, and then slavery breaks down because it can't be sustained as a way of producing things, and you end up with feudalism, and then feudalism breaks down because it can't be sustained as your serfs eventually start becoming educated and wanting rights, and then the way in which you produce things moves to free people who are capitalist, and and that's how you produce things. But then Marx also said that the capitalism itself would, like we see, we've had quite a poor impact on the planet, and we're using a lot of resources rather quickly. And actually, I think with a lot of what's happening with this COVID disaster as well, we're seeing that things need to be produced, food needs to be produced for people. But whether we can kind of rely on a just-in-time, super efficient capitalist mode of production, I don't know. If we have periods of time where businesses can't open, brick and mortar businesses can't open, and then they essentially just go bankrupt. Like, can we still produce in that way? I don't know. This is kind of the point in which I want to kind of focus in on, is that idea of historical materialism, which is based in this idea of dialectic. So what's a dialectic? The dialectic is that you have a thesis, and then you have an antithesis, and then from that, and from the mixing those two things together, and discussion, debate, and experimentation, you then come up with a synthesis of those two ideas. And the idea among philosophers since Socrates was that's how you create greater liberty. That's how humankind becomes better over time. Yeah, it takes a few steps backwards every now and then, but generally we move towards greater liberty, and it's through this process of the dialectic. So it's not a polarized binary viewpoint of the world. It's more of a discussion between an idea, a counter idea, and then finding synthesis. So Karl Marx, his two greatest influences were Adam Smith, and David Ricardo. Three great influences were David Ricardo, and then and of course Hegel. So Hegel, the Hegelian dialectic, he used to try and find truths. He used this idea of the dialectic of a thesis, an antithesis, and then a synthesis among those two ideas. One of his more famous dialectics was what's called the master-slave dialectic. And it may sound like I'm jumping around quite a lot here, but I'm just trying to get to the very kernel of why I think Bitcoin is important for greater liberty for people, but not through the self, through collective action. So in the master-slave dialectic, maybe I should just stop sharing screen here, if I can figure out how to stop sharing a screen. Being shared, click to control sharing, okay. Goodness me. Oh, I see. There we are, I'm back. So the master-slave dialectic, it's so you have a consciousness, and then it's just sort of floating around in nothingness. And then you have another consciousness, and then they meet, and there's a struggle. And then one ends up dominating the other one, and you end up with a master and you end up with a slave. So it's good for the master because he can tell the slave what to do. Over time, the master begins to resent the slave because the material world, which is being built around the master, is actually being built by the hands of the slave. And the master realizes the slave actually has more control because he's the one who's actually growing things, he's the one actually producing things. So although the master is in a position of power and authority over the slave is actually the one who also has the power. And you can kind of see this play out in somewhere like, if you look at the US and like if you go to some of the states closer to Mexico, where they have a lot of Mexican workers, they'll often kind of dehumanize Mexican workers because they feel this kind of resentment that a lot of the things kind of being built around them is being built by the slave as opposed to the master. But Kegel's point in this sort of mind, this sort of thought experiment, is that neither of them can be truly free and conscious beings without considering the other person, and peership is really your only route to be able to have actual liberty for both consciousness, because you can't have it with a master and a slave, because the master's, he's not free, and it may feel like he's free, but actually hasn't got any control over his world. And then the slave isn't free because, of course, they're a slave. So this is what really interests me about Bitcoin, and in fact just free and open source software, is peership. So you're taking control, and this stems back right to Stallman, who was producing software, and then all of a sudden that software proprietary interests wanted to take control and wanted to copyright it and take the control away from the producers. And Stallman said, no, we want to continue to have control over the thing we're producing, and we want to be able to do what the hell we want with it. We want to be able to give it to our friends. We want other people to kind of work on it. We want to be able to share it. So then you have the free and open source software movement kind of sparks off from that idea of producers controlling what they produce. And then within free and open source software, it's obviously you have kind of hierarchical structures which form between developers or whatever else, but generally we're all peers. It's each to his own ability, each to his own need. You can use that thing as much as you want and as much as you need, and then you just contribute where you can. Running the software is contributing, with like Bitcoin. Just owning Bitcoin is contributing to Bitcoin. But then if you can contribute more, then for sure, like, contribute more. And I think this is kind of where I started off contributing back to Bitcoin, is as a free and open source commons, you kind of feel almost a responsibility that because you're getting so much use and out of this thing, that you kind of need to contribute back into it. And I think that's a very human reaction, which we shouldn't fight. People shouldn't fight against, and we should kind of embrace. But that then builds this structure where there's no one person in control who can make decisions for people. It's control over how the software is going to run, how the software is going to change is spread amongst all of its users. And then it becomes a big experiment on how can we make it the sort of flattest version of consensus. So how can we have, like, democracy from the bottom up? So it's there's no authority telling people what to do. And in that regard, then yes, like, Bitcoin is very anarchist, and also I think it's very kind of left, and kind of in some ways it's sort of almost structured like a cooperative. Yeah, I mean, and this kind of makes sense for me that the reason Bitcoin exists is because there was a form of money which was people had control over, and we didn't have any control over the users. So inevitably, through the dialectic, you end up with this form of money where now we do have control, and we take this thing and we turn it into a protocol, a public good, and then as a utility, like a commons, as a resource, almost like a natural resource. If we're using it, we can almost have a duty of care over it to kind of contribute back to it. But that's just like the commons of the. So if you look at the Charter of the Forest, which was attached to the Magna Carta, that was about how the common folk would maintain and use the forest, and then everyone could reap the benefits from the forest if it was maintained and used in a certain way, and it gave common people access to the forest. This is represented in the Robin Hood mythology is from the Charter of the Forest. So this, and I mean obviously you do have the steal from the rich to give to the poor, but the kernel, the truth there is that when you have like a decentralized, flattened, you remove hierarchy, oligarchy, then you end up with kind of like a fairer system. If you do it with money, then a small percentage of the people haven't got control over money supply, which means that eventually money will become more distributed, but not in a forced way. So the ideas of state, there is actually a quite an anarchist concept, again, which is kind of almost an anarchist concept from Marx, which is a concept of the withering of state. So when you end up with a socialist society, that's the concept state would just wither away because you don't need it anymore, because everything will be controlled through cooperatives and whatever else. But I mean, that in itself is anarchist. But so control is flattened among all the users, but it's not chaotic. It's democratic, but it's a true form of democracy. And that's the thing which is I find inspiring about Bitcoin, and why I think that Bitcoin, relates very well to anarchism, and then also why I kind of see the socialist. I can reconcile my socialist beliefs in there as well. And then going back to the name of this rant, is don't box Bitcoin in, like don't brand it as just being this Austrian economic tool. Yes, like Austrian economists, people interested in that stuff, they can use it for that. But then also, someone who's looking at building a cooperative could use some of the stuff we're using Bitcoin. And then, someone like Yanis Varoufakis, like an MMT post-Keynesian, could create fiscal stimulus on some sort of second layer. So it's how can we use the technology to make a better version of the things which we're building, depending on our politics or whatever. And I think in every case, you end up with, if you're using it for Austrian stuff, if you're using it for Keynesian stuff, if you're using it for socialist stuff, you end up with a better, fairer, less corruptible way of building, those political ideas and social ideas. So I understand it wasn't so much. I didn't focus in maybe enough on the sort of anarchist side of things, but as I said, I'm sort of socialist, lefty anarchist type. As further resource, like Bakunin's a great place to start if you're interested in anarchism, as is Proudhon as well. So I think that's kind of my rant over.
Okay, very well. Do we have any questions from anybody? Any feedback? Nobody?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. About the Bitcoin being controlled by individuals and community, but don't you think that there is also the risk that it can also be controlled by big companies? And
well, so within Bitcoin, there were a lot of big companies, very powerful people who had a lot of Bitcoin, a lot of wealth, and in fact controlled all the miners which were being produced for mining Bitcoin. And at one point, they did try and take control. And that was always, for me, I was interested in Bitcoin, but it was kind of assumed that the miners had the last say when it came to how Bitcoin would actually work. And then when these big players, started trying to seize control over how the protocol works over, the majority of what the users, and the way in which it seemed that the users wanted it to work, there was a conflict. And this is the user activate soft fork times and the No2X movement. And but I think Bitcoin at that point kind of proved that it is controlled by the users. The users ultimately are the ones who decide how it works by the software they run. And that the miners work for the users. So yes, like interest groups have tried. I mean, if it were when was that? Was that 2017? I think it wasn't the SegWit stuff. But if we were was it 2016? If we were pre-2016, I'd find it harder to answer that question. I'd say it was a threat. But I think now Bitcoin has proved that or during that episode, I think Bitcoin proved that it's not a threat. And actually, it's better for Bitcoin. If no one has control over how it works apart from the users collectively.
Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully, if we want to play devil's advocate, we can't be sure how it will be when Bitcoin is bigger, right? Then, yeah, let's knock on wood.
Yeah, well, so I mean, there's there will be points in time where we have to make hard decisions for Bitcoin, collectively as users of Bitcoin, and we will have other scenarios, like I'm sure, like the user activated soft fork, and but this is the game of consensus, isn't it? This is what cooperatives struggle with. It's how do you have like a non sort of hierarchical decision making structure, like effectively, like it's just dead hard, and this is why. Producing things in that way, where you don't have like someone just dictating how things should be produced, it happens less than sort of the capitalist. But it's if you go back to slavery and then you imagine something like feudalism, slavery made more sense. It was like it's easy, you just tell the people what to do and they produce the things. And then in feudalism, it kind of made sense that you would have someone who provides land, and then the people live on the land and they can farm a little patch of ground, and then they can survive off that and sustain themselves, but they can also work on the land of the feudal lord. But it's hard to kind of imagine a future where things are produced differently. And I think when it becomes less hard to do that, then I think that's when you are actually experiencing that transition. When you have that transition from feudalism to capitalism, and I think that when you have that transition from production being predominantly kind of collectively decided upon, like you just gotta have the right tools, and I think that Bitcoin is building those tools. But yeah, I mean, it's there's some big decisions, like for example, when you mentioned the 21 cap. In the future, maybe Bitcoiners, the users, will decide to breach the 21 cap to continue securing the network. Who knows? But whatever, if the users want that, that's what will happen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for those who don't know, and the conundrum about Bitcoin is, I guess, if anybody tries to co-opt it, then it's just not Bitcoin anymore. Then you will have a slippery slope to financial services that we already have today. So whatever will happen then, there will be a Bitcoin will survive in a way, because okay, there will be struggle about the name, what to call actually Bitcoin. Yeah, for example, you mentioned the will the 21 million cap ever be lifted? So yeah, if Bitcoin becomes popular enough, and then the United Nations or the IMF says this is how Bitcoin should be, and a majority of people listen to this and follow their advice, and then run the node software that they propose. Yeah, then user-activated soft fork in a way. Yeah, then then this is then of course this is not so clear anymore. But then this will be a slippery slope, because then they can change any rules, and then they will end up. This will end up just as a financial service provider like we have today already too. Then they will introduce KYC, ML, and all the regulations, and then it will be just it. And then there will be a new Bitcoin, yeah, or
well, I think that
fork will live on that did not implement these changes as the actual Bitcoin that we know that this will survive. So there will be no change in the grand theme of things, I guess.
Well, the users will always win, won't they? The special interests, small groups, they won't win unless they're on the side of the users, and then they'll win. Or like you say, unless they can control the users.
Yeah, but what does users mean? As I said, if the IMF or the United Nations propose something, the majority of people, of users, believe them more than a few Bitcoin influencers on Twitter. Yeah, so so that's what I meant. But the slippery slope, as I said, is, I think, some sort of Bitcoin that we have today will always survive, and that's my opinion. Carl,
well, again, that's the beauty of free and open source, isn't it? We just
that has also to do with that. Yeah. Carl, you wanted to say something? Oh, was a mistake then. Anybody else have an opinion?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
right now?
yeah, no.
Sorry, I was muted, so sorry for that. So as far as I understood the response of Varoufakis, right? So he thinks that Bitcoin has really no impact. It's what I understood what he means. Is there good examples where we just could tell, look, this is the impact on society? Because if people ask me this question, I've kind of a hard time to find good examples where there's a real impact that changes the world right now if people would follow this way.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think we're building the tools, and I think the best way to win someone over like Varoufakis is, you know, to build some sort of Bancor, like Keynesian style Bancor second layer peg thing attached to Bitcoin, and then show them and say, look, you know, this can be decision making on this chain can be done in a federated way, so you still have some resemblance of your representative democracy, but geographically within a country. But I think just actually building examples of it working are the only ways in which. But again, like I said, I don't think that he has got his head around like things like the Lightning Network and how profoundly different Bitcoin is now to what it was then. But yeah, I think building stuff is like actually how you'll win people over, by building things which they could use, saying, okay, well, if this is the way in which you want Bitcoin to work, then let's try and build a thing to make it, you know, work for your interests.
Yeah, I think Lightning is a great example in the right direction. Do you have examples in mind, or if somebody would ask, can you show me how the impact can be? Do you have something in mind, or papers to look at, or places to look at where people have ideas that you support?
Or like sort of real world examples of uses where people have used Bitcoin in a way which, you know, kind of promotes the way I think. I mean, no, not really. You just Bitcoin's heavily. I mean, at the moment, it's mostly a speculative tool. Some people use it for, you know, someone in like a country full of conflict will use it to kind of secure their wealth, and that's great because they're using Bitcoin in a way which it should be used for. But I think we're just building the tools. You know, like we don't need it really yet, because money kind of works okay until it doesn't work, of course. So I don't really think there are any examples which you can point to and say, look, it works. You can just say, look, with this tech. So it's like with some of the experiments I was doing, you know, one of the experiments is making a tap and pay card, and it's just using like the Lightning Network and LNURL to simulate our tap and pay system now. And it works better than the tap and pay system we've got now, and it doesn't require a trusted third party. But you have to kind of build that as an example and then show someone, say, look, we can do this thing. We can simulate this technology, and we can do it in a way which doesn't involve having trusted third parties. So I think, yeah, this is why you got to build stuff. I think that's why people just got to keep building things, and then hopefully people will use the things we're building. And it's that. I think this is. You know, when we had the 2008 financial crisis, we didn't have Bitcoin, and like we have some pretty rocky economic times ahead of us. You know, even if you think we're over the COVID stuff, like the actual economic impact of the COVID stuff is, I think we're still yet to feel that. But you know, like me, I personally think that we've got some rough economic times ahead of us. People will be looking for alternatives, and they will be interested in this thing called Bitcoin. And this is again why I don't think we should box it in as being one thing. We say, you know, it's okay. You need it. You need a better fiat, which is less easy to corrupt. Okay, well, we could probably build that on Bitcoin, like as a second layer thing, or you know, yes, or you need decision making in some cooperative. Okay, we could probably have some sort of like decision making token, build something for that to do that thing. So yeah, so it's or I mean, people will just use it, of course, just to kind of get their money out and put it somewhere safe, which where they don't feel it's going to lose its value. So currently, it's not being used anywhere near as much as it could be used, and we're just building the tools. But we're in a very good place now, particularly with the Lightning Network. Like, we can do a lot, which we could do before, to simulate like legacy. As long as we can do everything which the current money system can do, and then more, then I think we're in a good place.
Thanks.
Okay, Kemal, you wanted to speak, I think.
Hi, Ben. Great
Hey,
topic.
man.
Thanks for your speech. Quick question. So if you take all the uncertainty from Bitcoin development out for a second, let's say Bitcoin works, it's amazing. It works just as we dream. And now my question is, do you think that the powers that be will basically be convinced to somehow adopt Bitcoin and ditch their central bank currencies and find ways on how to build their power structures on top of Bitcoin? Or do you think that new people will emerge who will build a new society on top of Bitcoin natively, just think everything anew, and just outcompete the legacy infrastructure?
That's interesting, isn't it? Because it's kind of like two different futures which could possibly happen. But no, I think it's a Trojan, and then it just kind of in Bitcoin, and I mean, you're taking free and open source ideas of how you run things, and then you're putting it into the money system, and I think it just corrupts it in a good way, but it just corrupts the legacy system. So I like, like the John Nash stuff, the ideal money thing, that maybe something like Bitcoin, it won't be the ideal money, but it will like strong arm a fiat into behaving, because people have something they can easily just pop out into, like a non-proprietary alternative. I believe the first sorry, my phone. I believe the first option is probably more likely, that they'll just utilize the technology, which they're already talking about. They're already, every central bank is looking at quote unquote blockchains. They'll just try and utilize the technology, and they'll try and make the use of it. And then I hope that there's not a sudden need for it, because that means that we're in some real economic crisis, like a depression, a worldwide depression. I think it's possible, but that's a scary thing which you shouldn't wish to happen. So I hope it's like a slow process of us just kind of infecting that legacy system. But I suppose, to your other point, to your second version future, that would likely happen if there were some crazy economic depression, and then society breaks down, and we just need like a medium of exchange, store of value, which we can trust. Then maybe we would, you would have like anarchist enclaves popping up, and people would be using like decentralized currencies like Bitcoin or Bitcoin. So I suppose it depends on how quickly society breaks down, or people lose confidence in the legacy financial apparatus, I suppose.
If I may just follow up real quickly on what you said. So I think that the second version is more sustainable and easier to reach, actually. But let me just say, there's a saying, or more like a law by Melvin Edward Conway, which says organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations, in brackets, themselves. So basically, the way an organization communicates will be reflected in its design. And if the way we communicate value, for example, is built the way Bitcoin is, which is the most essential communication in a society, is the communication of value. And if we are basically building on Bitcoin, then Bitcoin is our designer in a way, right? And our society will resemble the communication structure of Bitcoin, which is clearly anarchic. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, I know, I do. I mean, yeah, makes perfect sense. And again, direct action, all these people who are suddenly, if that does happen, the kind of more sudden version of events, they'll be using something which, they can run their own node, they can have some say over how it works, and the consensus, the decision making, which happens on Bitcoin, and then they'll engage, because getting people to I mean, people are encouraged not to engage in direct action. You know, it's a lot easier. That's about state control and societal control over people to kind of keep them in their place and keep them from causing too much trouble. But I mean, in fact, more and more, I think people have been taken to the streets. They've been protesting because you suddenly start to care about how your world works when your world starts to break down. Yeah, but if you're right, I mean, if everyone does move to something like Bitcoin, then people will want to have a say on how it works, and they'll want to run their own nodes, and they'll want to have autonomy. And then that's the essential part of direct action is autonomy. Is you know, getting the thing done, doing it for yourself, and that's very anarchist, yeah.
Yeah, MC, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we don't need to win anyone over to Bitcoin. I think it's enough that Bitcoin is 10 times better than the legacy system, and we need to. Yeah, it's enough that there is Bitcoin, and you already see that the legacy system tries to compete or tries to improve. Like, for example, in Germany, you can send money from one bank account to another bank account in minutes, and even on the weekend. That's new. That was never possible before Bitcoin. And also, there's like a API to access German. I'm not sure if it's an EU thing, but in Germany you can access bank accounts from the outside, so other parties can access your bank account. If that's a good idea, that's another thing to talk about. But they have a standardized API to access bank accounts, so they try to improve it. I'm not sure if they get to an open system that everyone can develop stuff on. That's another thing. So Bitcoin is more open. You're free to do anything you like on Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin is still 10 times better than the legacy system. But we see that they acknowledge that there could be some competition in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I agree completely. But I think it's okay to kind of get people excited about it, you know. And if there is someone who's like Yanis Varoufakis, that's why I was interested in him, particularly trying to convert him, is because he always seemed fairly well informed, like he kind of understood, you know, what blockchain was. So he was someone I was kind of interested to have some contact with, and then hopefully maybe we'll look into the Lightning Network stuff. Maybe we'll see the second layer stuff and find that more promising. But yeah, I mean, I agree. There's no reason for people to have to go out and evangelize, and there's an inherent danger in that because you attach your own, you know, beliefs or whatever to Bitcoin, and then you sell it as that thing when it might not be completely truthful. But I think it's okay to try and get people excited about it and say, okay, well, you know, you want to do this thing, well, Bitcoin can do this thing. So, but we need to build it. So how are we going to build it? Yeah, you're right. It is already strong arming banks and central banks, and every week there's a story about some central bank exploring Bitcoin stuff, and then, you know, a lot of these people in central banks aren't idiots, and they'll understand why Bitcoin is Bitcoin and why other, you know, why other, you know, cryptocurrencies or whatever, why they haven't a decent market share, and why everyone is excited about Bitcoin and why it's got such a large community of users. So yeah, I mean, I would love to know some of the conversations which happens behind closed doors, and I'm sure there's been some central bankers, politicians expressing real concern over this new thing, which is far better than the way they currently, you know, control money. Yeah, I agree completely. It's yeah, just but it's okay to get people excited.
Yeah, I would say it's you have to try to excite others, but yeah, I know that there are many people that simply can't see outside of the old system, so it's really hard to convince somebody. Yeah.
But then that could be, I mean, so I've got some friends and I've been trying to convert them to Bitcoin for years and years and years. And eventually I think the thing which got them was like some of the coupon stuff you got now on Bitcoin, or the like the reward back things. I don't remember what they're called, but there's a couple of apps which do things like that. And I'm actually now more interested in Bitcoin because of that. So we just got to build the tools, man. And then like the people will come. But it is a form of direct action as well to go out and, you know, spread the good word. But there is a danger, I think you're right, on evangelizing.
Yeah, so a hand from Lazar. Speak up.
Yeah, I would like to ask a second question. So, yeah, during this environmental crisis and also COVID crisis, people are thinking about more localized economy, more local produced things, and yeah, how this some sort of cryptocurrency, how can it be bounded into some geographical regions, or can it be compatible with some local economy idea?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in the idea of local community value transfer, kind of small community. I know Christian Rutzel, he does a lot of work on this as well. The community money, and you know, you don't have to use Bitcoin. You could use some Chormy and Cash thing or whatever. But you know, preferably, I think we want to kind of build things on Bitcoin. But I think with maybe somewhere with the Spectrum and the what's the RGB type stuff being built on Bitcoin. I think if that happens, if we can have some sort of tokenization, we could have some sort of local token or pegged token or something to Bitcoin. Or, you know, we can deliberately unpeg it if we want to, but do it in a way, and we could even have inflation or deflation, but do it in a way where the control isn't within the hands of, and this is what that technology is, this technology is good at, even if it's like a federated control. You know, no one's interested in building something where a small group of people in a room have control over it. But yeah, no, local, it's likely to happen as well. There'll be more and more kind of local currencies and value transfer which happens, and whether that'll be kind of like branded locally, or you know, whether they'll have like a Welsh pound dish. Well, in fact, I mean, to that point, there's the Welsh, not Welsh nationalism, but the people who want Wales to be kind of free from the rest of the from England and the UK. They produced a book, and in that's one of their suggestions for a particular Welsh pound or a currency would be like a digital cryptocurrency. So I'm not really interested in people making shitcoins like a Welsh pound shitcoin. I would like something which is pegged to Bitcoin. Not pegged, but something attached to Bitcoin, like a second layer thing. And in some way it has some interoperability with Bitcoin. As I think you kind of need that there as an anchor. Some people would just argue, I suppose, that you just the actual how people trade these tokens would be the anchor, but I would like it to be sort of attached in some way. But I do think that, so one of Yanis Varoufakis's concepts early on was the idea of like a debt token. So if you had some big company which had some horrible crisis and they couldn't afford to pay for certain things, and they could produce a debt token, and that debt token, I mean, it sounded a lot like, you know, what happened with the Bitfinex exchange when they got hacked. You know, for better or for worse, it was done in a very kind of like, okay, we're going to produce this debt token, you're going to take it, and you can just shut up and take it. But it did mean that Bitfinex didn't have to close down. Like, they didn't get empty GOCs. They didn't have to like shut their doors as an exchange, as a Bitcoin exchange. For the funds which were lost, they replaced with this debt token, and then I think the people then eventually everyone was made good again, and they kind of got their value back. Or it was better than the alternative, which would be that, you know, the exchange closes down and then it gets caught up in litigation. Well, and Yanis Varoufakis had a very similar idea for big companies in financial crisis. And again, I think it's a likely thing to happen. I could see it happening. But then I suppose how you stake that token to that area or that group of people, if it's tradable, and you don't end up with some sort of like oligarchy type scenario where someone just takes all the credits. I don't know, yeah, no, that's something which is, I think, a lot more work needs to be done on, and people should get interested and excited about, is local community monies for companies, for geographical areas and regions, or even for, you know, like in somewhere like Rojava, where you have people who are kind of separated by land, that they could have some sort of like agreed upon token which they use. So yeah, no, very interested in that.
Thanks.
Okay, Kemal.
Why should these local communities use a token and not just use Bitcoin? What would be the use case of the token? I've heard about this RGB and a few times in the past few weeks now. I'm not really sure what it's good for. Can you?
Yeah,
maybe.
Well, I mean, I think RGB. I mean, I'm not sure whether that'd be the best technology to use. That's just kind of one I was clutching at because there's not much else out there currently. No, I suppose it's what you want it to do. Like I think as one of my favorite kind of sayings is, why not just use Bitcoin? You know, why not just use Lightning? Why not just use Bitcoin? Because you can do a lot just on Bitcoin. But I mean, they may want some sort of fiscal stimulus. So if you look at any of the modern monetary theory stuff, you know, if you print your own sovereign token, then your own sovereign currency, then you're not necessarily subjected to all the functions of a money where you don't have control over over how it's printed. So it could be that, you know, the Welsh pound, that we all decide, or geographically each council, you know, collectively decide that we want to produce more of them, so we can pay for some infrastructure, and then that infrastructure then yields, you know, creates some sort of fiscal stimulus, makes things more efficient, so it actually, you know, pays for itself over time, and then that could be done through some sort of money printing. But
why should anybody? Why should anybody want to hold such a token that can be inflated when they can hold Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, you could argue that. I mean, you know, you could argue that right now, couldn't you? But if people want like a stable money, which they can use day to day, like Bitcoin isn't that. You know, it's prices all over the place. So with such a token or currency, then maybe you could produce some more stability. So you could have, you know, like a stable coin for a country like the Welsh pound could just be a stable coin, but we could also add MMT type fiscal stimulus. I mean, I don't know 100% whether I agree with any of that stuff, but I'm just saying that that's maybe why they would choose. People would choose to use that over using Bitcoin directly, is stability. Also, you know, you know, if you have the Welsh pound, like, people will like that. They'll feel ownership over it, just in a sort of like national value, because they like being Welsh or whatever, and they'll want to use the Welsh pound. But yeah, it could be stable, and then it could be, you could have some fiscal stimulus for infrastructure stuff.
But the way I see it, Bitcoin is the most stable. It's most predictable. It's most reliable. It can't be corrupted. We exactly know how many of it there are, and it's the most stable thing. And the others are just a bad measure. And that's why the Bitcoin price is changing in these shitcoins all the time, because they are artificially inflated. Nobody knows their inflation schedule. It's arbitrary. We don't even know how many Welsh pounds there are, or US dollars. Nobody knows it. And how can you say these are more stable?
No, I'm not saying they're more stable. I'm saying that if you were to build that on Bitcoin, or using some of the technology we have been experimenting with on Bitcoin, in Bitcoin, then it would be a better version of a fiat. So yes, it would be, you would have, I mean, so there's a lot of study on inflation, and a lot of people argue that close to zero inflation is good for money. So, but I mean, you could have that on Bitcoin. You could use the Bitcoin technology to build that. There is a stable coin built on Liquid Network, I think, and this is, I think, where they will. You asked why would they choose? Well, that's why they would choose it. That's why the Welsh government would choose to use a Welsh pound rather than just converting directly to Bitcoin, because you couldn't feasibly economically do that in a society currently. Maybe in the future, who knows? Maybe Bitcoin will suddenly magically become stable. I think it's unlikely. Maybe when enough value kind of falls into it, then it becomes stable, and we could just use Bitcoin directly. But in the meantime, then you can have a money, and you can sometimes a sovereign currency needs to have the ability to be able to adapt and change for whatever. Maybe the Welsh, we have like a crazy economic crisis just in Wales, and we need to produce some stimulus. So maybe it makes sense to have a sovereign token of Bitcoin. Who knows?
Well, yeah. So maybe if I may share a few insights from the Bitcoin awareness game that I'm currently being part of the team that is directing it. And the Bitcoin awareness game, for those who don't know, is a game where Bitcoiners from around the world make photos of Bitcoin stickers in public places and send them in. And they get paid for that in Bitcoin, right? Cool. So when the game started, the payout was 615 Satoshi. And since then, the payout hasn't changed, and it's still 615 Satoshi. Meanwhile, the Bitcoin price has risen from 9,000 US dollar when it started to 12,000 now. And in US dollar terms, the payout in the beginning was 0.6 dollar cents, and now it's 0.8. Well, it's $8, not 0.8. 6 cents, and now it's 8 cents. So while the Bitcoin payout has stayed the same at 615 Satoshis, the US dollar shitcoin price has gone up. And since we are obviously still paying our stickers when we buy them from the local print shop in fiat, it is becoming, yeah. So, do you see where I'm going? It's already here. It's already happening. People are being paid in Bitcoin around the world multiple times a day. Just knowing my own transactions, and there are many more Bitcoiners out there who are doing this, and the economy is growing, and there are many places, many shops that are selling their stuff for Bitcoin only. Of course, it's not the best economical decision, but it is an economical decision, and it does something also with other market participants. Because if they want something that they can only get for Bitcoin, they will get Bitcoin, right? And it's what's happening. So and also there are a few stickers. Thank you, Michael, for showing the site. There are some stickers related to today's topic. That's why I wanted to pick up and talk about this game. So if you go to the sticker library, there are 2 stickers, exactly. So one is called Applied Anarchism, and it basically says Bitcoin is applied anarchism, right? So just that. And the idea is basically that it's a rabbit hole for those who it resonates with. And the other one is No Gods, No Masters, which is a slogan from the anarchist Labour Party in the United Kingdom, and it's something that beautifully applies to Bitcoin, because there are no gods and no masters, right? Because it's controlled by the peers, and as I said before in the quote of Conway, the internal communication structure and the incentive structure, the game theory of Bitcoin, if it becomes the standard of value communication of our society, then it's design choices when it comes to designing the society will be transferred to the society if the law of Conway is right. And many believe it's right so far. So I don't see a reason why it shouldn't be applicable to future societies who adopt Bitcoin, because that they will basically resemble the inherent value structure and the incentives and the game theory that has Bitcoin in it. And this also means, as a consequence, that statists will never get Bitcoin and will never find a way how to integrate Bitcoin into their power structures, into their legacy power structures. So I don't really see a world where Bitcoin is dominant currency and we have nation states that are taxing their citizens without their consent. So voluntary contributions is the only choice for collective action then. And I think this is something that all Bitcoiners should agree on, that this is something that is good. And maybe my question here would be that since you identify as a socialist, or as far as I got it, so how does it work, socialism, on a voluntary basis?
Well, so I mean, you're going back to that concept of the withering of state. You don't need state, do you, if you have like a socialist society? I mean, how do you achieve the production or means of production being owned by the producers? But yeah, you can try and use state. You can trust, you can nationalize healthcare, education. There's actually state's quite good at that compared to private sector. Education is not so good, and same with healthcare. But it's still clunky and it's still buggy. Partly because how do you, it's like the money, how do you cost things effectively? But I mean, you're still going to have tax. I don't see why you're not going to have tax. There's real. You buy a house. You live in an area. You pay a tax. I think. But what you will have, maybe one day in the utopian future, none of us pay tax. Great. But but I'm talking about a medium term, the next 100 years, 200 years. What you would have is you would have much fairer tax systems. So when you make it when you look at the history of tax, as it becomes harder and harder and harder to collect, it becomes fairer. Because when it's easy to collect, then certain groups are targeted, and then other groups aren't targeted. And then as it becomes harder and harder to collect, like you can't target certain groups. You could just, if you have more wealth, your tax. If you spend, so say if you buy a big massive house on a big plot of land, then you'd be taxed. You could have it for real world products, like we have it now. Like we don't voluntarily pay tax for VAT. It's just there, it just exists. But I mean, so this is a point I made in Yanis Varoufakis' letter, is that you could have a tax system where, say, I allocate where my tax goes. So I pay for something at a point of sale, and I get my 20% tax, or 10, I don't know, whatever percentage of a tax there is. But I actually allocate where that tax goes. I say, well, I want it to go towards these different wallets, which account for different sectors in the economy. So you end up with some form of democracy kind of through paying taxes, maybe. I don't know. But that's one way in which you could kind of use, and you could do that now. You could use the Lightning Network in that way right now. It would work. You could just have, as long as you have the re keys and the invoice keys for these different wallets, you could choose where that tax were to go, and you could just design a wallet to do that if you wanted to. I don't think you're going to get rid of tax. I think that's, I mean, maybe one day in the future you would get rid of tax. But conflating the socialist tradition with just state apparatus and control isn't correct. Like the traditionally socialism was anti-state. It didn't like, Marx didn't like state. He thought it was a way in which that the bourgeois kind of kept their power. Which is what we have now, like, the neoliberal kind of state capitalism, which you see in something like the US. That's how the rich stay rich and just keep control, is through state apparatus. So, I mean, if that's how you want to interpret, socialism, then that's fine. But it's not the definition. That would be state socialism or state capitalism or some other definition. I'm interested in producers having control over production, and then having say over how it works. And you do get that in some, like if you look now in some businesses, you have that. You have, people have share stocks in the business, or they'll have some sort of voting rights. So that happens more and more. So we're not in the same sort of capitalist society that Marx was existing in. But I just think that that's the inevitable way in which people will attain more liberty is if you get rid of the Jeff Bezoses, if you design a decentralized Amazon where the producers can, well, most of the value of the production is going to the producers, but it's that hard. And like, maybe I'm just being airy-fairy and unrealistic, but I think it's something worth like trying to work towards with building the technology which would allow something like that to be possible. But yeah, who knows? Maybe one day we will have no tax. I think that'll probably please everybody.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, I saw a hand from one of our Michaels. Is there a question from Michael? Okay, not any other question from anybody else?
Well, I'll ask a question if you don't mind. In Germany, you have like, I've noticed when I've been to Germany, you seem to have a strong, like particularly among your hacker scene, there's a lot of like lefty anarchist sentiment, and I've noticed that. I mean, how do you find Bitcoin is kind of received among those people? The technologists and the lefty hackers. Because I personally found that they associate Bitcoin with Lambos and the kind of the greed and the trading and all that crap, rather than the actual technology being able to move value frictionlessly without trusted third parties. So how do you find that generally like Bitcoiners are received in Germany amongst the sort of lefty hackers, anarchists?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult relationships. I mean, at the Chaos Communication Congress, there's been Bitcoin Assembly for a long time. Maybe MC can also talk about it if you like. Then I don't have to do it. MC, are you still on the line?
Yeah. So actually, I think I started the Bitcoin Assembly and at the CCC conference, and then Rootsol arrived and all the other Felix Weiss and so on. And it, yeah, I don't get why the hacker scene or the CCC in Germany don't get open source money and free internet money, like magic internet money. It's so awesome, but I don't know. They just they don't get it, and also the problem is like there was a few years ago, 3 years ago, so there was a few talks on cryptocurrency, and they had Zcash there, like something Suko. So the guy from Zcash, and the talk was awful. It was a really awful talk, and so nobody really introduced Bitcoin there like it should be introduced, and even there was there are smaller venues where you can talk on the conferences. For example, Chaos West makes a stage, and we used the Chaos West stage, or many crypto and Bitcoin Assembly used that to talk about stuff. And then the next year they not allowed to use it for us. So it's, I don't know. I think first they think, oh, it's needing too much energy, and why use it? There's a euro, and you can use the euro. It's fine. I don't know. Or even maybe more Star Trek like, money is bad. I think that's also a part of it. Money is bad, and we don't like money. I think that's also a part. Like always is the discussion why the Congress or the CCC camp or any event has to cost so much. So there's always a discussion why it has to cost that much. And if you look to other events, they are even more expensive than that, and it's cheap as it is. And also all people working there for the CCC and organizing it, doing it for free. So there's nobody paid in the whole organization. So that's maybe I think that's wrong, because it favors people that have money and can do like half a year planning and organizing an event, because somehow they have an income from somewhere, because it's not, they don't get it from organizing the event, and so you don't get the really good people organizing the event. You get the people that cannot do financially. So that's like my view on that. But yeah, it's sad, I think.
Yeah, I found it really interesting when I went there. That is that Bitcoin's such a small table, and then I was like, when you go and speak to when you go to other areas and talk to them about Bitcoin stuff, it's like you're shilling, which again, like why building stuff is. I mean, I know. I think it was this year, wasn't it? We had like a couple like some workshops. Russell did a workshop with the Raspberry Blitz, and there were lots of like just Pi enthusiasts who were interested in what he was building, because it was building something on a Raspberry Pi. So maybe that's how people get hooked in. But yeah, I found it potty. I couldn't understand. I went there. I was like, why can't I pay for stuff in Bitcoin? What's going on? Like free and open source money. Come on. Like why can't I buy a drink with Bitcoin? It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, hopefully that'll change eventually.
Yeah, I think there's also not one official opinion by the CCC. Many people have different opinions. Some accept Bitcoins on their blog or podcasts or whatever, and some don't. But I think most would agree with also with Richard Stallman's position, right? If you know it, he said no, Bitcoin is not private enough, and you can evade taxes with it. Maybe you know about. Do you know about Richard Stallman's position?
I remember him. I remember him doing that thing where he was going to make a better version of Bitcoin.
Yeah, right. Right. I have. That's what they're working on. Knut Thaler, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's just like eCash from David Chaum, I think, but in an open source version, and of course also semi-centralized and taxable, right?
Yeah.
So I think the users can be anonymous, but the merchants who accept the currency will not be, and will be accountable for taxation. And so you can't move value freely around and so easily, I guess, anymore. Just like in Bitcoin, yeah, just send it to a wallet. I think that's a different thing then. And they also, of course, have to cooperate with banks. It's not banks have to implement this. I mean, just like what David Chaum already tried in the 90s, but in a more cooperative style, not as a startup. Yeah, I mean, if they are successful, why not? But it's just but it will not have many of the properties of Bitcoin, right? Like inflation resistance and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's interesting they're working on it, but it's just a shame that, I mean, it's silly to claim that Bitcoin is perfect in its design and the way it works now. And again, we're at the end of history. It's perfect. Don't need to touch it. Works perfectly. Bitcoin fixes this. I think it's silly to have that opinion. Like it could be more private, and there's lots of work which needs to be done to it. But just because there's lots of work which needs to be done to it doesn't mean that you should try and start a whole new thing. It just makes sense to work within the framework of Bitcoin, and rather than try and build a whole new thing. But yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll be able to pay at CCC in Thaler for my beer.
Yeah, I think it will be euros or something like that. It will be national currency, I think. This is
I mean, direct action. This is where we should have some. So I got like in LN bits. It's been really hard actually. We've been working on the LNURL faucet thing, but the concept is, and this is what I want from it, is that you'll be able to print out like pretty easy, like a couple of hundred stickers with QR codes on, and then someone scans the sticker with a Bitcoin wallet and they get the Bitcoin. However, if they just scan it with a regular QR code scanner, they get like an Insta wallet. But then they can take that Insta wallet and scan other QR codes and then get more Bitcoin. And then so if I did it in my local village, if I put like a few hundred of them around my village, then the people who first figured out that they could scan it and get some Bitcoin, they would like try and find all of them. It'd be like a race to find all the Bitcoin. But like something like that I know the problem is they just come and tell you off in the assembly, don't they? If you put up buy Bitcoin stickers everywhere. But maybe something like that where you could like generate some like economic, I don't know, like an economy without officially doing it. And then have some machines or something dotted about, like some sticker machines or some vending machines, which you can pay for with Bitcoin. But then you can get the Bitcoin from these stickers. I don't know, but like that would be pretty cool. But this is the point of Bitcoin, isn't it? It's just like it's amazing that it continues to thrive and develop and get better, because it's even from people who should be our allies. We get a lot of hostility. So just imagine when all those people come on board, like how wonderful that'll be.
Yeah. Short. There also like there's a event called DEF CON in the US, and they had an online version now, and I also went there once. It's in Las Vegas normally, and they also don't have anything really big in Bitcoin. So even they had only they call it, I think, village. I'm not sure. They had a Monero village, and that was all like 2 years ago. And this time in the online, they had this Monero thing, and then they had the blockchain something, and that was maybe a little bit on the Bitcoin side, but also all the other stuff. And I tried LN Bits there, so a wallet faucet on LN Bits. They did it all online in a chat in, it's a commercial one. How is it called? Discord. It
Zoom
was
thing or something.
Discord,
Discord,
yeah. And I put in there a picture of a QR code, and I put in the LN URL directly, and nobody scanned it, because they or even it was deleted, the picture, and so they were really scared to take any Satoshi. So I don't know how to do it right. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's a point. I haven't thought of that. I mean that extension, the LNURLW extension, because of the new IP to Tor stuff. Well, not because of that, but also because it was like made in a bit of a rush, and we still need to work on that extension. It's getting there. It's getting there. Hopefully, next couple of weeks we'll have it nailed and running perfectly.
Not a technical problem. It was like a social problem to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. They don't want to scan a QR code with their phone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you do it? How do you prove that it's not just some scammy QR code? Yeah, because actually a sticker which says free Bitcoin with a QR code on it, just scan this. That's like technical people aren't going to go and scan it, are they really? Because they'll think, oh, it's a scam. So I'm going to get my phone's going to get hacked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It would be nice as well, actually. I was thinking about making some coins, some Bitcoin coins with like an LNURL faucet in the coin, so you can use NFC. Just an NFC sticker basically inside the coin. So 3D print half the coin, put a sticker on it, 3D print the rest, or maybe 3D print into two halves, and then put a sticker in and stick it together, and then put like an LNURL faucet, because you could like top up the faucet too if you wanted to inside the coin. LNURL is great.
Yeah, I think the ATMs, the Lightning ATMs are really interesting because you can show something and you don't giving something for free away. So you have to buy it with some coins, some fiat coins, and I think that's really good.
Yeah, I like them. I got the Fossa, which I made, which is based on the SP32. And I think I've probably got one behind me somewhere. But that's like a Lightning ATM. The only thing is the CoinMex, like those cheap CoinMex, you can't trust them. You can't leave it somewhere. You have to. I mean, if you're just showing someone, you're saying, "Hey, I'll put some coins in here, and you'll get some Bitcoin out," then cool. But currently, with using those cheap sort of €50 or 30 euro CoinMex, they're not good enough. So I've been doing a lot of research into CoinMex, trying to find the right price point, plus it not like getting clogged up if you put too many coins in or put the wrong coins in. So I was going to bring out a new version of the Fossa, but it's all reliant upon the CoinMex. I did maybe get to the point where I was just thinking maybe just to avoid having like a multi-coin solution. It's the price. Like I suppose it's what you want from it. Like, there are some nice coin tumbler type things where like the things you get when you go through over a bridge or something, or through a toll booth, and you chuck your coins in that basket thing and it tumbles through and then spits out. Some of those seem a little bit more reliable. And then someone else recommended the CoinMex they use in Vegas, or they used to use in Vegas, because they never clog. they always work, but they're a bit more expensive. They're like $300 or something. So, and that's too much for a lot of people making a little fun ATM thing. So yeah, it's tricky. If anyone knows any good CoinMex, then send them to me.
Yeah, all right. Any other questions? I think we got a bit off track here, but
we did, but then we didn't, because like
yeah,
going back to that concept of direct action.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. That's direct action, isn't it? Building shit to try and so rather than building stuff which people can use and find useful, and have that ooh, wow moment people have when they have that Bitcoin experience. So that's direct action, baby. That's anarchism right there.
Definitely. Yeah, but if there are no other questions, then we can stop the live stream. And if anybody still want to chat informally, then you're welcome to do so. So I'm stopping the stream now. Thanks for watching, and next month we will have topic about how central banks print money, how that actually works. So maybe we will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.